everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Creators. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Sherry Pallas. This week's show is on neurodiversity, and we've got an amazing panel. Thanks for joining us. If you are watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe. If you are on Facebook, grant StreamYard access so we can see your name when you comment or have a question. Please make sure you keep all comments and questions related to the show's topic, and remember, this is a safe space. I want to give a big shout out to our top sponsors, Ruth, Kirsten, Michelle, Ray, and Heidi. Thank you so much for your generosity and support. If you enjoy watching the show, please consider supporting it. Go to sherrypallas.com and use the support tab. There's literally dozens of ways to support me in the show, and it's as low as like $3 a month. But just being here and welcoming us into your home and joining this conversation supports me more than you'll ever know. I appreciate you. Okay, so let's meet our guests and get smarter. Let's see if I can be organized. Oh, wrong one. Danae Castile was raised in fundamental evangelical Christianity, a preacher's kid no less, and she spent several years in ministry herself. She now works with people of all stages in deconstruction towards spiritual health and wholeness, whatever that means for them. Welcome back, Danae. Where are you? There you are. Hello.
So glad to be back.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Laura. In fact, one of you sent me an email last week or the week before. This is Carl's wife. So you asked for her to be on, and the universe answered. She's here with us tonight. Laura Forehand has her master's in elementary education and has taught first and second graders for 16 years. She's a board member and certified trainer of Whole Brain Teachers of America. She co-hosts Whole Brain Teaching, a podcast, and on Podbean. She also writes and podcasts with her husband, Carl. They co-wrote Out into the Desert, Thriving Outside of Organized Religion, which is available on Amazon. Most importantly, she's a mom to three, and a Mimi to Holland, Jackson, and Sloan. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you. So grateful to be with you tonight.
I'm so glad you could make it. And last, but definitely not least, we have Ash. Ashley Lavender, it had nothing come easy. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, to deeply religious parents, Ash is a fierce go-getter and has a passion for intersectional advocacy. As a Reformed Roman Catholic and spiritual mystic, the one saying that holds strongest is, if the first door isn't open, ram it down somewhere else. Welcome, Ash.
Happy to be here, as always.
Thank you so much. So this is a topic that has a lot of misconceptions. It's relatively new. I remember when I was growing up and my mother was extraordinarily clean. If there was a fork in the sink, some dust on the table, my life was complete hell. And I used to tease her that she was anal about her cleanliness. Speaking of Freud, she never got it and said, quit assuming that my butthole is near my cleanliness, because she was so flustered. But now I look back and she had total OCD. That's what it was. For me, I learned that I was ADD when my son was diagnosed with ADHD. So in learning all of these, in getting names and diagnoses and descriptions, we can have more patience, more empathy, and more understanding for the neurodiverse community. So I wanted to keep this up on just for a second so everybody could look at it. It is the image that was posed in the advertisement for the video, and I will post it in the group. But this is just a snapshot, just a small snapshot of what neurodiversity is. And the panel has a specialty in each of the ways. So I wanted to, let's do that, talk in all different ways. So Ash, because we started backstage talking about this and you did the homework, I want to start with you today. Give us the what, when, whys, and hows of neurodiversity.
So for me personally, I had a very unique experience with it. I've never had a normal neurotype per se ever for my entire life. Since I was born with cerebral palsy, which is basically, for lack of a better word, a brain injury from you can get it as a baby, which was what I did, or they classify CP up until age 2 or 3, I believe it is. So basically, since I was literally born with CP because of some stuff, I have never had a normal neurotype for anything, for the lack of a better word. And when I was in college, I was going through the process with my psychologist to kind of get everything on paper. We pulled out the DSM-5, and he, the whole like classic 3-hour questionnaire about everything with all that to get my file together for college. And turns out I had 4 mental illnesses that I had somewhat of a hint that I had, but not much. But then it was like, at that point, it was all, oh my God, this makes so much sense. Because having a physical disability, my life was never simple. It was always like complicated with different things. And like, no wonder stuff popped up when it did. Because, dealing with some of the crap that I had to deal with as a kid, it was like, no shit. Like, nothing about that is normal. And obviously, my brain reacted the way it technically should have, considering that.
So, and I'm going to open this up to the panel. Is neurodivergence considered a mental illness or just a different ability? Is that any type of question that, because I know there are certain terms that we are no longer able to use. The R word is really bad. And when I think of ADD, I don't think of myself as having a mental illness. There's other things that I question mental illnesses on. But is it truly a mental illness? Is that the way that this is perceived, or is that the truth?
I personally see it as a little bit of both. Because I see it as like, okay, this is the way I am, it's whatever. But I also can acknowledge the fact that it makes my life hell sometimes. So for me personally, it's a little bit of both.
I think a lot of it is perception too. Like we talk about neurodivergence because it's different from what society calls typical.
Yes.
But what if society had been set up stuff in a different way? What if we were neurotypical and everybody else was neurodiverse?
Right.
I think also because society is set up in a certain way, one of the biggest reasons, there are certainly reasons that are internal and innate for why certain parts of neurodivergence are very difficult. But there's also a lot of things that are just societal that set us up for failure because the systems are created for the majority or for the neurotypicals. And then that doesn't work for people who are neurodivergent. And so I think it's a little bit of a matter of perception. I think it also depends on how much, what else do you include in neurodivergence? Do you include bipolar? Do you include people with anxiety disorders? Do you include OCD, which isn't actually on that list, but should be on there? And
yeah, I realized that as we were talking backstage. I'm like, where's OCD?
Right. And so are these things, are the, and what are the pros of any of these, and I think a lot of times it's hard to find the pros and we only see the cons in them. And to me, if you can find pros in that neurodivergence, then it's not so much that it's a mental illness in and of itself, but it manifests as a mental illness in a lot of ways because of our society and because we aren't set up for success.
That makes sense. I mean, because there was no words for it. I was fidgety. I was unfocused, unless I put my brain to it. I mean, there were all of these things that were, of course, negative terms. And I really had to, on my own, figure out ways that I could function. Especially being a single mother and having to function, having to get out there and go to work and do everything that was needed, and not being able to find my shoes in the morning. I mean, it was really like that type of ridiculous stuff. So I learned to make lists, and without lists, I would be a ball of Jell-O in the corner. I would have nothing would be accomplished. Laura, what's your experience?
Yeah, I think that, for me, I look at it more as like neurodivergence rather than mental illness. In education, I have students of varying abilities in my class. The one thing that I appreciate about neurodivergence coming to light, coming to the forefront, if you will, that we're having so much discussion about this, is it has helped education to really take a hard look at how it is teaching
Yeah.
students. For so long, we have treated every student as if they're all like from the same cookie cutter, right? And they're not. And even the four of us sitting here are not all the same. We don't all learn the same.
No.
We don't all interact the same. And so I think there was a disadvantage to that, where I feel like now we are educating ourselves so much more. It's allowing educators to really find the best way, the most efficient way to educate every student, right? And shouldn't our classrooms be inclusive in that way?
Exactly.
Absolutely, they should be.
Laura, it's interesting you bring up the education side of this, because me personally, I didn't have a real problem with my cerebral palsy part of it, education-wise, until I had a class actually in college that I was in at my community college. And I had already set up, with the disability services department and all that, and I did everything I needed to do. But I remember it was my very last semester at community college, and it was terrible because this teacher made my life absolute hell. But it was basically like a art appreciation type class. And for some reason, she wanted us to do like different drawings of stuff. And she said, it's because I want you to appreciate how hard it is to draw, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But then the second she said that, I started panicking, because I'm like, I am going to fail this class. If I knew this was involved, I wouldn't have never signed up, because the way my brain works and the way my cerebral palsy makes my brain work, I do not process things in like I can't draw for shit. And it's because my brain doesn't like process certain things correctly, I guess, when it comes to how to do it. Like, I don't really even know how to explain it.
I get that, because I can picture something in my brain, but it does not bring forward to my fingers. I can't draw either.
Exactly.
I struggle with stick
exactly. And I think honestly it's because of the fact that CP is a brain injury. And so long story short, we went through this whole disaster of like her trying to spend the entire semester of that summer making me do all this stuff in the class that I specifically told her, hey, I physically cannot do. And long story short, I ended up dropping the class, and it was an absolute shit show. But it was like, it took me that to realize like, oh crap, I physically cannot do this because my brain's not wired to do this. And if I would have known that I was expected to do it, I would have never taken the class.
It was until my 30s that I learned in selling corporate training that there are ways that people learn differently.
Right.
And knowing that now, as opposed to as children and in the educational system, that is going to be key in our next generations of making sure that we're not producing cookie cutter people, and we are applying to the strengths.
Definitely.
For me, I struggle with a strength for OCD other than ADD, that I have hyper focus or none at all. I have more energy, but it's challenging. It's definitely challenging. And again, educating myself on my own abilities was the only way that I could do it. So I'm really happy that education systems, schools, even corporate training organizations are focusing on the different types of learning with or without neurodivergence involved.
Yeah, I actually never had trouble in school. I'm like a late diagnosed ADHDer, which is pretty common for women because it presents so differently in us. And so I was stellar in school. Like I flew through school with straight A's and things like that. I loved pleasing my teachers, but I'm not a people pleaser. And so I'm a questioner, and I'll buck against authority if it doesn't make sense. But as long as it makes sense, like I'm fine going along with, and it's the way school was set up made sense for me. And so I did great in it. And it wasn't until I hit like late high school that I started hitting some roadblocks with some depression and things like that, that really kind of caused my ADHD, I guess, to become more apparent. And in hindsight, I see it in who I was young. It just didn't affect me negatively in school, right? And so it wasn't until the pandemic and watching TikToks that I saw all these, great, psychologists and things bringing to light, like ADHD is oftentimes late diagnosed in women, and here's why. And I was like, I resonate with that. Like, oh, I really, I really get people with ADHD. And then it became, maybe I have ADHD.
Yeah. I mean, the awakening.
Like, I really think maybe I have this. And when I finally realized I did, and went through the process of being diagnosed, which was really freeing, right? It gave me, I was able to become gentle and compassionate with myself.
Totally.
Like the things that annoyed me before that I couldn't do, instead of thinking I'm lazy or I'm ridiculous or, there's something wrong with me, this is how I'm wired. So how, not to make an excuse for myself. So then the next question is, okay, so how do I work with how I'm wired?
Exactly.
To still function in good, healthy ways, right? But it gives me a lot of compassion for the fact that the ways that I function aren't going to look like everybody else. And that's okay. And I've also worked with teens for, I guess, 15 years now. And so a lot of experiences with bipolar and schizophrenia and borderline personality disorders and things like that. And it really opened my eyes a lot to how hard the world is and how hard life is if you don't think the same way as other people, if you don't function the same way as other people, if things just don't come naturally to you. And especially when you're young, I mean, I think it's hard when you're older too, but when you're young, there's so much as a teenager that's hard to process and deal with because we don't think as teenagers the same way we do as adults anyways. And so our perspective on the world is very different, and it's supposed to be at that age, but it makes it harder. And it especially makes it harder sometimes for adults to be patient with us. And then you add anything else to that. And so my heart just really, that became like a big place where I became very passionate about working with teens who really struggle with those things. And it was kind of something that fell in my lap initially, and then something I started seeking out.
For me, it was really freeing too, because everything that my mom labeled me as was negative, the fidgety. I mean, I too, on a roll, all the way up until similar to you, until some trauma started happening. I was on honor roll, and then I wasn't. And it was like from an A to an F student like that.
I was that way in college.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, and again, in hindsight, it was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. But having the label or the diagnosis or something like that was so much more freeing than the adjectives that I was used to growing up. So it was like, okay, I now know what's wrong with me. I know, again, I don't even feel like it's something that's wrong, just different. And this is why I've done these things. This is why I've done this. It makes perfect sense. Do you see it in kids as young as you school, Laura?
Yes, absolutely. I was going to say that I love that word compassion, especially in education, because, and I love the fact that we're talking so much about this neurodivergent, because it gives us the opportunity to understand children. Yes, I teach first and second graders, and absolutely, I see autism. I see other, traumatic. We talk about trauma. You talked about the pandemic. So we've all experienced trauma, and we all are dealing with that right now. But I absolutely do see this in kids, even in my classrooms today. It's just that word compassion means a lot to me, because it means that I am going to try to give this child what they need in order to be successful in my classroom. And if I can have that compassion to wherever, I don't really care for the word label. And this is someone who hasn't been labeled, but for some reason that just doesn't sit well with me, to say that we're going to label somebody, because in my classroom, I choose to teach all of my students that we are all unique and we are all different, and that's okay. We all learn differently. And that's okay. That's just a huge message that I interweave through my curriculum throughout the entire year. But I absolutely, Danae, when you mentioned that word compassion, I wrote it down because I'm like, that's what is being allowed to happen in education and probably in other aspects of life, because we're having discussions like this tonight.
And I love that you're a first and second grade teacher. My daughter, who has ADHD like me, is in first grade, and she's also textbook strong-willed, and I do not use that phrase lightly at all. I worked in early childhood education for many years, and it took me a long time to even admit that she was strong-willed, because I don't like that it's overused and misused. She's textbook.
Oh my God, my mom got the book from James Dobson, The Strong-Willed Child. I wanted to burn that book.
I know. But that comes with some really beautiful attributes too. And so a lot of times I go, she's a challenging child, but I don't want to tame these things out of her. Like sometimes I kind of want to, but most of the time I don't. But I noticed even at a young age, what a difference it made when she had teachers who were like, okay, she is a different child than everyone else in my classroom. But they worked with her and they worked with me, and she was a biter. And my oldest was like the picture perfect child, and it was actually kind of helped that we had an easy older child, so they knew that it wasn't us being bad parents.
Yeah.
But like she was a biter, and that was part of her like sensory processing issues and emotional regulation issues. She has a really difficult time with emotional regulation. And that's totally fine, because we can work on that, right? That's something we can learn and we can work on. But but her teacher was great about, okay, I'm going to talk to my other teacher friends, see if they have any solutions. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go read, and I'm going to talk to my strong-willed groups and see if they have any ideas. What we came up with was one of those like bracelets. I do not use that phrase lightly at all. And the teething bracelet meant that she could chew on that and any oral fixations, and she stopped biting.
Yep.
Like she didn't actually want to bite other children. She just needed something to do with her emotions.
Yes.
And she
interesting.
And
Can I just go ahead.
Teacher cares that much about not punishing a child, but working with them. And I just love that you are into that too.
Well, can I also just say that we all need regulation? Okay.
Yes.
If I'm sitting here bouncing my leg right now, I'm regulating. Okay. So we all get dysregulated, and we all need to regulate. And so to like, as an educator, to expect our kids to sit in a nice straight row in their desk, straight sitting up, that's unrealistic. We all are going to have moments where we need to regulate. We're going to need to, I'm going to call my husband out. He's probably watching this, but the way
he just said help. He corrected it. It was supposed to be hello.
He regulates by chewing on pens. So like every pen that's back here right now is, so when you talk about that oral regulation, that's part of it, like, so I think we just
effective and it's not harmful, then that's a win.
Right. Exactly. And that's what we need to do as parents and educators, is find what's going to work instead of shame,
absolutely,
blame, all that stuff that we heap onto our students so young. Like
I remember actually in particular, I would get a lot of anxiety and stuff during tests and whatnot, because anxiety. I grew up basically with anxiety because of my disability, and I would get like a lot of anxiety, which would kick my OCD into overdrive. Oh shit, I'm going to fail this test, etc., etc. Like whatever catastrophizing thought you could think of that my OCD came up with was there. And I remember I noticed I started doing a lot better in college on tests and stuff, because I would go down to the testing center and everything and do all my tests down there. But also in college, they don't yell at you for having a piece of candy in your mouth when you're taking a test. And, that would give me like the oral fixation that I need to be able to focus on something. Even when I was in college not doing tests, or even now, if I'm working on a resume or working on an application, I've got, something to snack on or something, a hard candy or something, because I cannot focus without like an oral fixation thing going on.
So can I blame my smoking on my ADD?
Yes.
Possibly. I mean, that's another thing. Like, CBD is really helpful for my anxiety, and it's kind of a two-way thing with me when I can smoke, because it's like I have the CBD that's obviously helping my anxiety, but then I also have the oral fixation that kind of calms me down, so that I can regulate that.
Yeah.
Instead of, like I remember with one of my exes, when we would, when I was living in Dayton, we would have like a fight or a stupid little thing or whatever, and I'd go outside and smoke. And, it wasn't just the CBD that was calming me down, but it was just having that like oral regulation of, okay, I can't be yelling at you if I have something in my mouth right now, So that kind of helps regulate me very well as well.
So how much do we just need to fix society? Because I remember when I put my son into a Christian school in kindergarten, which was wholly a mistake. And they reached out to me and said, your son will not sit still for the 6 hours of class. And I was horrified. He was in kindergarten. And I was like, I can't sit still for 6 hours. Again, not realizing at that point I had ADD. But when you have a system that means control and taking away the sparks, it induces more trauma. So what do we need to fix in society other than educating and talking about things like this to make sure that society isn't making this worse and not addressing the strengths as well as their weaknesses? That's the way I always viewed it. Sorry, Laura, but when they started telling me to put my son on drugs in kindergarten, I was like, no, I'm not going to make your life easier by drugging him. In 8th grade, I actually did put him on drugs and they helped him. But at that point, I could regulate, I could do all of those things. So where do we go as a society? How do we make this easier on all of us involved?
I think education's a big part of it. I think maybe the biggest part of it. I was thinking about this topic earlier today, but I was thinking churches are part of the problem, because anything that's, considered mental illness or whatever, there are so many churches that are doing better now. There are so many churches now that are doing better and recognizing that therapy is a great thing. Go get it.
Yeah.
But still, most churches, mainstream in America, are anti-secular therapy, and they local counseling at best, but mostly just pray it away kind of stuff. And medicine is not the answer. And I think that's hugely problematic, considering that we still have such a large contingency of Christianity in America. And so as long as people are still basing their values and decisions off of what institutions like that say, that's going to affect generations. So I was thinking about how much the church plays a part in this.
I never even made that link, and you're so right.
You really are. Because believe it or not, part of my, as I said, most of my neurodivergency, if not all, stems from my physical disability. And I remember one very big thing that happened to me in my freshman year of college. I was in the hospital recovering from a shunt malfunction. It was a disaster. But I remember one of the nurses came in and they're like, and I'm like, oh God, here we go again. Something that is going to set me off and trigger me. And anyway, one of the child life specialists came to talk to me at the time, and she was like, Ashley, your anxiety is really bad. Why aren't you on meds? Just out of curiosity. And I looked over at my mom and I said, I don't know, Mom. Why aren't I? Because she had that like deep, like religious thing that was holding her back, and among other things that I'm not going to get into right now, but things that were holding her back from doing that, even though it was being made clear that it was a problem. And, I've managed to get off of them because I've just developed a lot better coping skills and stuff over the years. But my life was hell for 18 years because nobody really had thought about that. And when they did, they discredited it for stupid reasons. Like, basically, part of the reason my mom at that point had hated the idea of meds for me was because I was on, I think it was Adderall for years, and it didn't do shit. Well, no shit, it didn't do anything because I never had ADHD in the first place.
Oh, wow. Well, there you go.
So,
my son wanted to get off of them in high school because he said it made him a zombie.
Yeah.
And he lost his spark. But had I given him to him when he was younger, he wouldn't have been able to judge that.
Yeah.
And that's what I needed was, I'm sorry, teachers, I'm not going to make your life easy. Granted, I was totally ignorant about how hard teachers' lives are. But it was, I can't drug my child when I related so much to everything he was doing. And again, it was like, okay, because I have ADD. Is it, before I close that out, Laura, did you have anything to comment on that?
I was going to say, I just want to piggyback off of what you both said. And I do agree with you, Danae, that the Evangelical Church, especially because that's where I'm from, is a huge stumbling block in this, if you will. I feel like if, you have neurodivergent issues or any type of problem at all, it's equated with not being right with God somehow, or like you had said earlier, we can just pray this away. We have a grandson who has multiple disabilities from birth, and people, he's 4 now and he's, thriving, but people will still say to my daughter, like, well, we'll pray for you because you just never know. God can perform it. Okay, here's the deal. I'm going to tell you right now, I love him like no other. But this is who he is. And I'm okay with that. Like, I'm good. Like, we don't need to fix him.
Yeah.
Like, especially growing up, super, super conservative Catholic growing up, I got, I'll pray for you all the time. And granted, I did appreciate stuff like that when I had like massive stuff going on in the hospital, that kind of thing. That was fine. But it was like random little old people coming up to me at church being like, I'll pray for you. I'm like, thanks, and you're trying not to cringe inside because it's like, for what do you?
Well, again, and that's why I had trouble with the mental
kind of
illness.
A backhanded comment.
Yeah, I mean,
that's exactly right. It is a backhanded comment,
and it creates shame.
And it does.
Yeah,
like there's something wrong with you.
Exactly.
And you just kind of be like,
no,
this is how I came out because God wanted me. I mean, like, depending on what you believe, like.
God, and the message there is so like contradictory, really. Like, God doesn't give you anything more than you can handle. All right, but I'm going to pray for you that this will go away. Like, what? Like,
great.
No,
it's the cognitive dissonance, and people mean well usually, but I think that to me, platitudes and cliches are a big pet peeve for me, and I have a whole like Mythbusters course I used to do for teens, like what's actually in the Bible and what's not. And it's amazing how many of the things that Christians say on a regular basis are not in the Bible. Yeah. And we probably all know that, but like most teens don't. And so like that was something that I would kind of teach them, like these things are not in the Bible. Stop basing your faith on them. And stop falling for it when people tell you these things.
Accepting it. Danae, while you were talking, it dawned on me that I have one of my pet peeves is that our society has separated our head from the rest of our body. Insurance doesn't cover, for the most part, optical, mental health, vision, ears, teeth, all of that stuff. And while you were talking, I thought of that and thought of a child going into school with a broken arm and how different that child would be treated among everybody than someone with a mental illness, because they can see it. They can see the broken arm. Oh, he can't play ball today, or let me help them tie their shoes. Those types of things, because we can't see.
It's okay that they can have pain medication.
Yeah. I mean, we don't treat the brain like we treat the rest of the body. Granted, we'd still have, if, cancer, I'll pray for your cancer or something like that. But it's more of a stigma of shame when it's an illness with your head as opposed to anywhere else in your body.
I think this is probably any kind of invisible conditions. So I have fibromyalgia, which actually is also neurological. So I guess it is brain oriented, but it presents throughout my whole body, but like it's an invisible condition. Right. And so people don't understand why I may not want to take a shower today, because if I do, it's going to lay me out for an hour, And so, man, dry shampoo is my best friend. And just little things that other people may take for granted, I can't do the same way as everyone. I am super lucky with my particular condition. My meds manage most of my pain. I just have to sleep a lot. So I recognize also that I have tons of privileged experience that a lot of other people with fibromyalgia don't have. But so when I deal with people kind of being dismissive about my invisible condition, I just think about how much worse it is for everybody else who struggles more than I do, because I can hide it a lot better because I don't deal with as much of it as long as I stay on my meds. And, most mental illness is kind of invisible, right? Like we can't see it like a broken arm and a cast. And when people can't see it and they've never experienced it themselves, they have a hard time creating empathy about it and even sympathy towards it. And you get a lot of just don't think about it.
Suck it up.
Yeah, just suck it up. You just got to keep calm. You just need to calm down.
Going off of what you said about the empathy part, I can definitely relate to that. And I noticed it very, very obviously when I switched out from the children's hospitals to manage my physical shit to the adult system.
Oh.
And I got to the adult system and they're like, well, why are you having all this anxiety? Like, what else is wrong with you that we don't know about that we need to know? And I'm like, I have fucking PTSD. That's what's wrong, because I've been in and out of hospitals my whole freaking life. And it's like, when you're a kid, they understand kids are afraid of hospitals, but then you've got an adult with medical PTSD, and that's a completely different ballgame, and they don't know how to handle it. Because, like, it's not that I'm magically not going to freak out just because I turned 18. Like, come on.
And in our society, we see a lot of mental illness people killed by the police because they just simply don't know how to handle it.
Right. Exactly. And I found a lot of people in the medical system don't either.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, it's crazy. Because it's like they suddenly expected me to get over, 25 years of medical trauma just because I happened to turn 18.
So what we're hearing here is that this isn't just about fixing the education system or maybe the religious system, but also we have the medical system. We also have the
perception.
Like this is systemic in every single major institution in our society.
Exactly. It really is.
Well, and I mean, the evangelicals are always my favorite to blame, but with the removal of the mental hospitals in the 80s, even Scientology doesn't believe in any mental health, and they're growing by leaps and bounds based a lot of just on that belief. When we separate the brain from the rest of us, and it's so ironic because the brain controls everything. So when we say, oh, that doesn't need to be messed with, there's nothing there, it's, something else. It's just a total gap in logic. I mean, and empathy. Maybe it's just because we're lazy. We don't want to reach out and love our neighbors.
Right, exactly. And it's the weirdest thing, because speaking of the whole medical system thing, another thing that happened to me was when I was 16, I had basically a shit show of stuff happen with my shunt. I was in the hospital for almost 2 months straight. It was a complete disaster. PTSD triggers out the butt. It was terrible. But anyway, near the end of one of my first admissions from that, I said, I don't want to go home yet. I know we've been here a long time, but I don't want to go home yet. Something is wrong, and there's something that's going on here that's not showing up on these scans, and I don't feel comfortable, going home anytime soon because I know there's something going on. And they're like, oh, well, it's just your anxiety. Will you just chill? And it's just this, and it's just this. And then they go to put my shunt back in because it was externalized at the time, which was why I was in the hospital. Anyway, they go to put it back in, and they get in there, and this whole, oh, it's your anxiety, it's all in your head. They found, polyps on my colon that was affecting everything. They couldn't see because stuff like that cannot be pulled up on medical imaging. And they thought all this was my anxiety.
Or what do you see in the systems that are helping this?
I do feel like in our district, I can really only speak to where I am in Northwest Missouri. One thing I do see that is a positive is there are a lot of professional development programs taking place where teachers are able to be educated in things like trauma and neurodivergence. And I feel like there's like more resources out there because of that. I have found various podcasts. I will say though, a lot of this I've had to kind of do on my own. So like I do go to a trauma-informed educator, trauma-informed classroom, professional development, like once every other week for like a whole day of training. But through that, I found other resources. And really, I have to be my students, future students, current students, I have to be their best advocate by actually like going and finding, listening to podcasts on these types of issues, reading books. I have to just be vigilant about that. Coming here and having this conversation, I think this is a really important. I mean, I think all your conversations are really important, but I really do believe that this is an important conversation to be had, because I do think there is a lot of what you said, Danae, is so true. It's systemic. My sister was telling me about a situation in a hospital that she used to work at. I can't share the details of it because they're under investigation, but it was someone who was suffering from a mental illness. And the story she told me was, I thought it was another like George Floyd incident. It was horrific what she shared with me. And these were people in the ER that were like, shouting obscenities and things at a patient who, was neurodivergent. And I'm like, something. So it goes farther beyond, but we have to start taking responsibility for this is, we can't just continue to go throughout our world as teachers or even just individuals in our world and think that everybody's going to be like me and turn a blind eye. We're all unique and we're all different, and we need to learn about each other. If we're going to live in community with each other, we have to learn about each other and learn about, what makes us tick and how we can get along, how we can make it work, or it's not going to work.
I think that living in community piece is a big part of it, right? Because we're talking about societal level issues. We're talking about widespread systemic issues. And the whole point of having a society is to live in community, because we thrive better in community as humans. Like just our species has evolved.
We're communal people.
We have evolved where we thrive better in community. And that's why so many of the things that we predicate our society on are the way they are, because that was how we learned to survive. And that's great. But one of the problems with that is that one of the ways that we best thrive in community is if we agree on everything. And we now live in a much more global and diverse, and we've always lived in a diverse globe. But because people are moving more now and we're connected to people across the globe, and life is getting more diverse in our immediate vicinity now.
Yeah, you can't hide from it anymore.
My immediate vicinity is literally Raleigh, North Carolina, or my job, or whether it's my immediate vicinity is in the people I interact with wherever they live. But my immediate spheres are now more diverse than they would have been, 50, 100, 200 plus years ago. And so we can't all agree. We can't all see the world the same. And we are going to have different experiences, and we need to be more compassionate about that. And we need to address it. And I think that societally, we're not addressing it. I think you hit the nail on the head that we've all need to take individual proactive effort towards this, but I also know how exhausting that is.
Yes.
Well, and it's also not financially feasible for a lot of people. I mean, I was so frustrated at the lack of support, and I still see it among my friends who have younger kids. Anna, my producer, has not hid the issues that she goes through with one of her children, and the lack of support in the community, not necessarily people, but the government, our local agencies. Yep. When my son went in this Christian kindergarten, they said, okay, well, it's going to be about $30,000 to get him permanently diagnosed and to go through all these things. I was scraping pennies to get by just to get him into this school, eating top ramen, not having any money just to have that. So my only option was to pull him out of a school that was supposed to give him a better education and put him in a public school where all of the testing, all of the counseling and everything was part of it. So it was like, okay, I'm so confused. I tried to do this in this, Christian organization that to give a stellar experience, but he never would have succeeded in any way, shape, or form had he not had that intervention from the public school. So, I mean, I am so thankful for that, because I didn't have the money. I didn't have insurance. I didn't have any of that. I was just trying to survive and get by and raise him to the best that I could under those circumstances. And I know that fast forward 30 years later, it hasn't improved all that much. There may be teaching, but to see what Anna goes through, the services are just completely lacking.
Dr. Palace, it's interesting you brought that up, because like when I was growing up in Georgia, I had a great support system with my public school, like while we were down there, and I had great stuff going on. But then the second we moved up here and my parents wanted us to go into a Catholic school and threw us in there, it was all gone. In fact, they were actually going against me, and I had to fight my own school to be able to carry my own books, because they thought that it was too dangerous for me to handle.
Oh, wow.
In 7th grade. And then I had to deal with the elevator being out like constantly in high school. With my private high school, I had to deal with that would have never happened at a public high school, because they wouldn't have let it. And then I had to deal with, the social isolation that came with all that, which gave me my depression in the first place. And
so it's a snowball effect,
basically. And like my parents kind of at the time were thinking that they were doing the best that they could have for us, putting us in this private school. But honestly, for me, I got some good out of it, I will admit. But for the most part of me wishes that they would have put us in a public high school, because I would have had the support that I needed with stuff, and I wouldn't have had people questioning me when I was trying to stand up for myself.
Which was total counterintuitive to me.
Right.
Because when I think of, I'm going to pay for a private school, I'm going to get a superior education, I'm going to get one-on-one, I'm going to have all these support resources, when in fact they didn't. They literally said the only thing you can do if you can't afford all of this testing is to go to a public school.
Right.
Which opened, like I said, again, all kinds of avenues and all kinds of support that I never would have had, which is also counterintuitive to the church. So I think that one thing that we've really made clear is, do not in any way, shape, or form put your mental health in your religious faith.
Yeah, I've seen where I'm actually, even when I was still very evangelical, and I was a youth minister and a campus minister, so working with college students and then with teens, I, even since then, have been vehemently anti-Christian education, because I've seen there's good. I've seen good as well. And I've had friends who've had amazing experiences, but the majority of experiences I've seen, and, working with teens, over 15 years, hundreds of teens, I don't see enough benefit. I see a lot more harm. And
I wrote a whole book about it. Wrote a whole book about how that, granted, at 7th grade, I was testing out at college level in English, in math, but I thought the world was 6,000 years old and Adam and Eve were literally the first people that arrived and all of that. So yeah, I have been recovering from that education for far too many years.
Yeah.
And not even addressing my neurodivergence on top of it.
Right.
So
yeah. I think also you were talking about how there was Laura was talking about the story about the ER staff who were not handling it well. And I also, even before that story, I was thinking about how one of the other problems we deal with is just compensating people to be able to deal with the difficulties. My ex-boyfriend was in special education for 20 years and just recently got out of it. He's too burned out and he's done.
Yeah.
And he worked in, he was in special ed, which is a tough, field, and there's a lot of burnout there. And he worked with, he was an education consultant for many years, working with parents with special needs kids, helping them find the right schools to go to and the resources. He did advocacy in DC for several years, and he's just done. And we don't need to lose people like that.
Yeah.
Right.
But one of the biggest reasons that he's done is because of the experiences he had to deal with in the institution of things. It's exhausting.
Mhm.
You feel like you're swimming uphill the whole time, or upstream, and you're fighting uphill the whole time. And we need people who don't burn out, but there has to be resources given.
They need
and so
more support.
who have the privilege to provide their own resources, or to buy their own resource, to access their own resources. And so I think that's problematic.
Mhm.
I think also we have people in the professions who would love to do better or to stay in, but they aren't compensated where they have the ability to. And we're not drawing new people into the field because the compensation's not there.
No
Right.
teachers are.
You have a
I
staff.
mean, Laura, you can't tell me you did it for the money.
It's so funny because a lot of people are like, I don't do this for, I don't do this for the money. I'm like, okay, well, money pays the bills. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah,
But
the
it's,
thing is,
I was going to say, it's true though. Like, I have a master's degree in elementary education, and this is no shade at all. But there are people that, have a high school education or maybe a bachelor's who make more than me, who, and that's
we
fine.
aren't affecting society quite the same way. Just throwing that out there.
Say that again. I didn't hear.
You aren't affecting society the same way that a teacher is. Not to at all dismiss whatever they are doing with their lives, because we need all of our people, all of our talents.
Sure.
Man, teachers have a massive influence on society.
It's everything. They cradle our next generation. And Laura, the same thing. I had a girlfriend that went into education. I went into sales, and I was making six figures. And after 20 years, she was like, I just got to 40 grand. She worked. I mean, I worked hard. I worked very hard, but corporate America will never be a classroom. Although I joked my clients were children, they were not. So to say that they are not rewarded and afforded in everything, they should be the heroes in our society. And instead, currently people are making things harder by saying you can't say this and you can't say that.
Right.
I don't know. The fix seems too monumental to me.
Yeah.
Right. And it's
Where we
just,
always come to. Yeah, go ahead.
it's just awesome you brought that up about, the impact of like teachers and stuff, and in general, because even to this day, for me personally, yes, my main thing is advocacy, but along the line, I do want to eventually go into the Air Force and do like mental health in the Air Force and whatnot. And who gave me that idea? My second grade teacher in freaking 2004 for our Veterans Day performance. I remember bawling my eyes out.
Aww.
And like to this day, I still talk to her and said, you are the reason that I'm going down this career. So like,
Nice.
for the most part, it is teachers that make that kind of impact. Like no other field has that deep of an impact for the most part.
Well, and we're talking about neurodivergence tonight.
Right.
And think about who usually notices that a kid needs extra help.
It's the teachers.
Who usually researches and finds the extra tools and tips and tricks and
Exactly.
ways to equip them to cope.
I remember
Connect you to other resources.
when I was growing up, a lot of it was the teachers noticing like, hey, Ashley's kind of skipping out on class a little bit, and my main concern is she's not getting her stuff done, but there might be something going on here. And it was because I had so much anxiety over not understanding the stuff that I didn't know how to explain that. And my one teacher was the first one to pick up on that, like you said, and nobody else had seen that before in me until she mentioned it.
Yeah. I think teachers are we cannot overstate how instrumental they are when it comes to neurodivergence, and not just like noticing it so it can be diagnosed, but more importantly, how can we make life easier? It's what Laura said. How can I make every kid in my class thrive regardless of what they need, regardless of the label? Teachers are the ones that do that. Not that parents don't ever notice it. There's so many parents out there who are amazing advocates for their kids.
Right.
Teachers are usually the ones who notice it first. And
the fact is that teachers spend more time with our children than we do.
Well, they're in the environment where they get to know this kid is struggling in this way. And also this kid's really good at this thing that no one else is paying attention to. I think that's another thing teachers do really well is saying, you're really good at this thing that testing doesn't praise you for, but you're really good at it.
Right.
That's huge, especially when you're neurodivergent and feel like everything you do is a failure. So, there is a plus side to who I am and what I have to offer the world. It may not get tested. I may not make A's in school, but I'm really good at something.
Right.
I believe ADHD is a superhuman power. So that, I wear my cape proud. But Laura, we give you all the love. You are the representation of the education for us. What say you?
Well, thank you. I mean, I agree with what you all said as far as like teachers kind of being at the forefront of, really seeing these kids. And I will say that I have had to change my goggles the longer I've been a teacher, but for the better, right? Because I've been able to learn along the way of my career. So, and I'm grateful for that. But definitely, I love what you're saying, seeing those different aspects of our students rather than just, are they an A student?
Yeah.
Like that doesn't matter to me at all, actually the fact that, a student can show kindness to another student that's struggling that day. Students that don't make fun of each other, that's huge. In second grade, like I nipped that in the bud the very first day. With, I teach using whole brain teaching, which is a teaching strategy. And the first day, it never fails. Somebody makes a mistake. And it's in that moment, I'm like, this is that teachable moment where I go, raise your hand in here if you've never made a mistake. Because when somebody makes a mistake, of course, all the kids start laughing and it's embarrassing. Or it could be like, the kid just thinks, well, now I'm the class clown. But in that moment, I take that to say, we've all made mistakes. And instead of we're not going to laugh at each other when we make mistakes in this classroom. Instead, we're going to say, you're still cool. And it is like beautiful to see that progression throughout the year, so that now it's like we're a community of learners that want to help each other, right? Rather than make fun of each other.
Yeah. Well, and I think we are at the top of the hour, but I'm a big proponent for onus. It's on us. So I would like to close out the show with some advice from each of you on what individuals can do to make this better. I would say, don't hate me, Danae, but I'm going to steal your compassion because I think now you're going, God, I got to come up with something else. But I think that, from my perspective, love heals everything. But to be aware that we need compassion as opposed to anxiety or getting angry or losing our patience, and realizing, like Laura just said, that we all struggle. We've all screwed up and done that. So to give some love to your neighbor and to help do this, of course, vote, select good politicians, and all of those things. Danae, what would you say that an individual can do to make this better?
For people who are neurodivergent, having that compassion for themselves and being willing to learn about how their brain works, how they're wired, and to start seeing it, like you said, as a superpower. What are the good things about me? What do I have to offer this world that no one else can do because I'm wired the way I am? Because every single person who's neurodivergent has a way that they see the world, that they function in the world that no one else can do. And they offer something that makes the rest of us better. And so, to believe that and to find it.
I like that. Ash, what would you give advice for someone to help?
I would say the biggest thing, especially for neurotypical people to realize, is we're capable of a hell of a lot more than you think. Because this has been more for me from a CP standpoint, but it's also hit me from a neurodivergency standpoint as well. They say, oh, well, you can't handle such and such situation because of your anxiety or your OCD or whatever. And it's like, excuse me, yeah, I can. And I don't say this, but I don't say this. I think it, but I'm thinking to myself, and I probably can handle it better than you can, because my superpower with my OCD is thinking of 6 million ways to fix a problem.
There you go.
So, yeah, we're capable of a lot more than you think.
I love that.
Give us some credit for things.
Thank you. I love that. Laura?
Yeah. For me, I always think that we're all hardwired for connection, but I think we need to learn to listen to those who aren't exactly like us and really, really listen, not listen to fix, just listen and learn from each other.
I love that. Okay, I hope that we gave you guys a bunch of really good information and that you will be able to open your heart to everyone around you. Thank you so much to my panel. They were phenomenal. Danae, any final words and where can people find you?
I love being with you guys and chatting on this forum any chance I get. So thank you for having me again. I can be found as d.constructionist on Instagram or Facebook and deconstructioncoaching.com.
Thank you so much. Ash?
So, as I said, the main big takeaway I hope y'all get from this is, again, treat us, I would say the whole thing of specifically I've heard actually a lot with autism is assume competence with a lot of things. And it's the same way with a lot of other neurodivergencies. So yeah, like not to assume that, oh, it's going to be such a big problem that can't be fixed. Because like, as I said, I've ran into a lot of that with my personal life and all that. And I just don't want other people to have to deal with the same crap that I have in terms of that. In terms of where you can find me, I do have a Facebook page. I do need to get my own, my personal Facebook. I do need to get my own website, Dr. Palace. We need to collaborate on that at some point. I do need to get my own website because I have been told that I'm very good with public speaking, so we need to get around to that. Other than that,
I think that's it. You good?
As Dr. Palace always says, walk in love, treat people with kindness. That's how you get everywhere, pretty much.
Perfect. Yeah. I did put up this resource at the bottom of the page as a really good resource out there. Laura, where can people find you and any final words?
Yeah, I have. Well, thank you for letting me be part of this panel. This was a great discussion for me. So, I have a personal Facebook page. Just, find me at my name, Laura Forehand. And then I have Instagram, Mrs.Forehand. A lot of times I put like whole brain teaching stuff, videos and things like that we do there. I do have like you shared, I have a podcast, Whole Brain Teaching, the podcast that I do with one of my teaching friends. And then Carl and I have the Desert Sanctuary podcast, and there's our book right there on the screen, so that we wrote together. So, yeah.
And he's already making comments.
I'm not surprised.
Well, I think that Ash triggered something in me that just is like a fire. Don't ever underestimate us. Don't ever. That's the biggest mistake.
I love that.
Don't ever underestimate us. You guys were phenomenal. Thank you so much. And yes, we will be heading over to the VIP. So you'll see us all there. Danae, Ash, thank you so much. Laura, you're phenomenal.
Thank you.
I'm going to send you guys backstage while I close out the show. Thank you. If I know what I'm doing. Technology. I hope you guys got as much out of this show as I did. Understanding, empathy, that is every week's goal, to try and understand your neighbor a little bit more so you can love them more thoroughly. Next week's show is going to be on Valentine's Day, and it's how to get through hard times with a loving heart. So if you're around, or maybe watch it later, but we will be here talking and exploring more situations where we can love more. As always, walk in love and have a wonderful week. Mwah! See you soon.